Afternoon. My name is John Engwang, and I'm standing in for my colleague Chongqing, who is the head man of the Year of China and one of the sponsors of the event this afternoon. We're here to listen to a talk by Li Shiguang, and his title is From American Dream to Chongqing Dream, the Making of Soft Power in China. A very evocative title, and I hope we don't learn much more about this. He is currently the director of the Center for International Communication Studies and the academic dean of the Department of International Communication Studies at Tsinghua University, one of China's most distinguished places. And this afternoon, he is here courtesy of the Year of China, the Watson Institute, where we sit, Straight Talks, and the Taubman Center for Public Policy. During the Year of China, we're hoping to explore the rich culture, economy, and politics of Greater China by investigating its past, examining its present, contemplating its future. We hope that those of you who are interested will visit our website and learn more about activities that are ongoing through the year. China's status as a world power and its internal development are both matters of global significance, and how China manages issues such as urbanization, environmental quality, economic equity, and political evolution will have crucial impacts on China's future standing as a world leader and global partner. Just in the last weeks, we've seen leaders from Europe visit China seeking help for the European fiscal crisis, and that's a story whose end is not yet known. But I think that episode certainly evokes the rise to power of China's role and its standing in the world. So we are so pleased to have Li Shiguang here today to discuss the Chongqing story, which gives a fresh angle behind the socioeconomic changes ongoing in China. Before he founded the journalism program at Tsinghua, he was at the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School at Harvard. He was a senior editor and director of the Political, Cultural, and Science desk at Tsinghua. That must be a huge desk. He was a science and medical writer with the Washington Post, senior writer and deputy director of the same desk at the Xinhua News Agency, and a young scholar of the UNESCO Silk Road Project, science and medical writer for the Xinhua News Agency in prior incarnations. And his most recent books include the titles Soft Power in the China Dream, Soft Power and Global Communication, Intellectual Dialogues of Tibet, and The Future of Journalism Education, among others. So he could spend a long time here talking, it sounds like. In addition to his current roles, he has also served as the Dean of the Chinese Academy of World Agendas at the Southwestern University of Political Science and Law. He has been a member of the Experts Committee for Disease Control of the Ministry of Health and a member of the Experts Committee for the Crisis Handling of the Ministry of Health. I think that's namely the SARS crisis. Vice Chairman of the Journalism Education Committee of the Ministry of Health and a leading media advisor to the Office of the Minister of Education. So we have a man of multiple titles and deep experience, and we are pleased to welcome him to Brown today. Please join me in welcoming Li Shiguang.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Wang. I didn't expect the senior faculty are turning out here. I expected that a group of students will be sitting around here. I'm going to talk about Chongqing story. And since it will be about 1 hour, and I try to make my presentation brief, but I have to cover the following points. And I will first briefly talk about Tsinghua University, where I'm teaching, and I will talk about Chongqing story and what Chongqing story means to China's development. And I will discuss whether Chongqing is a model for China in the future in the context of the coming 18th Party Congress of the Chinese Communists. And Tsinghua University, where I'm teaching, was actually a product of international relations. To be specific, China-American relation. Tsinghua University marked its 100th anniversary in April this year. And this year also marks the 100th anniversary of the Revolution of 1911, which overthrew the Manchurian Empire of Qing dynasty. And 100 years ago, in 1900, the Boxing Rebellion, China suffered a defeat with the 8 Western powers, including the United States. And the Chinese government was forced to sign a war indemnification or war damage repayment to the 8 Western powers. The Chinese government was asked to pay 250 million to 25 million US dollars to the United States. But the Chinese government felt that it did not owe so much money to the United States in the war damage. And the Chinese ambassador at that time, Ambassador Liang Cheng, had a meeting with the Secretary of State, Zhang Rui. And in the meeting, Ambassador Liang said that in his calculation, the United States did not spend so much military expenses in China during the war against China. Actually, the United States spent much less military expenses than most of the other its allies. But the United States demanded more indemnity than other countries. And the Secretary of State, Zhang Rui, realized that the United States did ask too much. So he had a meeting with the American President, Theodore Roosevelt, and told him the real situation is that, and the Chinese government actually used half of its budget paying the war indemnification in those years. As a result, the government didn't have any money to spend for the country's reconstruction, and the people did not benefit anything from the taxation of the government. The Manchurian government worried so much that the people will revolt against not only their own government, but revolt against the Western countries, which have a stake in their commercial business in China. President Roosevelt realized this, but he did not want to cut or reduce the indemnification or the payment. He wanted the Chinese government to build education. He believes that the only education can bring change to China. And because the Chinese intellectuals, politicians at that time, resisted the Western values. And some Chinese politicians insist that the Western things can only be used as a practical instrument, but not be used as an essential element in Reconstruction China. So the American government the Congress passed a bill that to use the money to build a school of American study in China, preparing the Chinese future leaders who are trained in the United States and will cultivate pro-American interest group in China. But the Chinese Commander-in-Chief of Navy, General Yuan Shikai, did not agree with this, because at that time, China was fighting a war and was facing the invasion from Russia and Japan in Manchuria. And Yuan Shikai wants you to use the money against the Russian and the Japanese invasion in Manchuria, because the Russian and the Japanese wanted to build a railway in Manchuria. And the Chinese government want to build its own railway. But this is something that all the Western power, including Japan, were against. The Western power did not allow China to have a right to build its own railway. So in the end, the American government gave the money under condition that the Manchurian Empire and the last Manchurian government should start a school. It's called the Tsinghua School of American Studies. So the Manchurian government finally agreed and gave the royal piece of land, the Tsinghua Garden, or the Tsinghua Royal Garden, as a location for the new school. And the school was officially named the National University in 1929. But the university was started today, officially started in 1911, just a few months before the 1911 revolution. And that's the relation between, that's a result of a product of China and American relations, which produced Tsinghua University. But now Tsinghua University has been recognized as the top university in China for several things. It's been recognized as a top university in terms of science and technology. And the university has been most proud of that. Most of its nuclear scientists and space scientists are from the university. Like almost all the nuclear scientists who developed the early Chinese nuclear weapons were from the university. And almost more than 70% of the space scientists are from the university. But now the university is more than science and technology today. It's a center of China's politics and of the Politburo of the Communist Party, which is the paramount body of power in China. Less than half of the members of the Standing Committee of Politburo members of Politburo are alumni of Tsinghua University, and almost 1/3 of the provincial or ministerial officials, communist government officials, have some relationship with the university. Now the university is a part of the China establishment, part of the China's political power. And Hu Jintao himself was a student from the hydraulic department and he graduated from the university in 1966 or 1967. And our next president, Vice President Xi Jinping, is also our alumni. He graduated from the university's chemistry department during the Cultural Revolution, and he got his PhD of Marxism from the university a couple of years ago when he was the provincial party secretary of Fujian province. Now I'm glad that Brown University has started to have some connection with our university, and I discussed this with Vice President Gutterman at lunch today, and we wanted to have cooperation in the field of public health and in the field of business school. Okay, that's the beginning about China and U.S. relations. First, I'm going to talk about the Chongqing story. Does any of you have any of you heard of Chongqing before you came to my lecture? Some of you didn't have not heard of Chongqing before you came here. And let me talk about Chongqing from the point of view of international relations. 700 years ago, when Genghis Khan of the Great Mongolian Empire ruled most part of the world, and his sons and grandsons were making military campaign in most part of Europe. The grandson and also the great emperor of Mongolian Empire, Mongol Han, the grandson of Genghis Khan and the elder brother of Kublai Khan, was launched a 30 years war against Chongqing. At that time, Chongqing was called Hechuan. But it's extremely difficult for him to take over Hechuan. It was called the fishing city in Chinese name. And after 30 years war, the Chinese did not surrender. In the end, he was killed by a Chinese soldier in the war. And the death of Mongol Han changed the history of the world. And because the emperor of Mongolia was killed, so all the sons, grandsons, and brothers were called back to Outer Mongolia, to the capitals of Karaharin, where the old capital city and where the center of the nomadic empire was located. So the military campaign was halted and stopped against Europe. And after the election of Kublai Khan as the emperor, the empire was divided up. So the Mongolian Empire actually disintegrated. Since then, the war against Europe was stopped. And so Europe, the Western Europe, was not destroyed. And so the history was changed since then. And all because of the war. And all because of the killing of Mongol Han in Chongqing. And 96 years ago, the Chinese leader, the late leader, Deng Xiaoping, when he was 16 years old, left Chongqing for Paris in search of China's path to modernization. And 96 years ago, Chongqing was just a small city on this island between two rivers. One river is Yangtze River, another river is Jialing River. And 96 years later, that is Chongqing today. And the Chongqing GDP's growth is nearly twice that of China's national average. Chongqing has a population of 32 or 33 million, and it's larger than Taiwan. It's larger than Taiwan. And the growth rate of GDP this year is 16.5%, twice that of Beijing, Zhejiang, and Shanghai. And China, it's the fastest growth rate in the world, and Chongqing twice that of China. Actually, some American journalists have already reported the story of Chongqing in recent years. 3 years ago, just before the Beijing Olympics, Ted Koppel made a documentary film titled The People Republic of Capitalism, and it's a long documentary film about the Chongqing story. And again, 3 years ago, people were talking about a new term. It's called China America. And the theory, the word China America was coined by Harvard professor Ferguson. And but after his visit to Chongqing, he realized that China America is not realistic. And Chongqing, the growth of Chongqing has created an internal economic demand, a huge internal economic demand in China. And so he wrote another article titled The End of China America because of Chongqing. And 2 years ago, the American journalist Robert Jeffers with Nation wrote a long story, Chongqing Socialism in One City. And he thinks Chongqing is an alternative to China's development. And I quote him, "I'm writing today from Chongqing, a vast city in central China." Actually, it's not in central China, it's in western China. That China's gateway to its western regions. But by some account, Chongqing is the largest city in the world, a municipality of 32 million people. Today, the Chongqing is the pilot project for the most important thing happening in China, and perhaps the world. The urbanization of as many as 500 million people from rural farms and villages into newly constructed cities. Chongqing is a microcosm of China itself. By microcosm, it means that Chongqing is both the biggest city in China, and in the same time, it is the biggest village in China. And it has the biggest reservoir in the world. We know about Three Gorges. Three Gorges Reservoir is located inside the Chongqing territory, and it has one of the biggest mountainous area in China. And it has the vast territory of poverty land and also ethnic minority people there. But a year ago, Foreign Policy published an article, China's Tomorrowland. The article used the title, describe Chongqing as China's dreamland in the future. And the feature article in Foreign Policy identified Chongqing as the Chicago on the Yangtze River, And 5 months ago, Dr. Henry Kissinger made a special visit to Chongqing under the invitation of the party secretary of Chongqing, Bo Xilai. And I traveled with him, and I published a column article about his visit. And I quote him here, "I'm very proud by the vitality of Chongqing. I traveled in many parts of the world and have seen many things. It is the faith the Chinese people have in their leader and the Chinese future that move me deeply. I saw Chinese leader first in Shanghai and now in Chongqing turn their vision into reality, Dr. Kissinger said. And by the end of this year, and Chongqing GDP growth at an eye-popping 16.5%, twice growth rate of China as a whole. And we know that the world economy has entered a long period of weak growth at the rate of 3%, while Chongqing has seen a 16% economic growth rate in recent years. Chongqing is also the world's largest producer of personal computers, producing 100 million PCs annually. That means one in every 3 computers is made in Chongqing today, PC, personal computer. And Chongqing's connection to the world. Actually, Chongqing was a well-known city during the Second World War, particularly to American soldiers, American Air Force. And in the Second World War, Chongqing was the wartime capital city in China, and the American Air Force military base was in Chongqing and in this region. And the Japanese never took it over, although a lot of air raid against Chongqing. And now Chongqing has this ambitious plan. Actually, some of the plan has been realized. Chongqing, now have this, the largest producer of laptop, but most of its laptop go to Europe, not from Shanghai or from Guangzhou. They go to Europe through the so-called the New Silk Road, through Xinjiang by the cargo train, high-speed cargo train, and through railway from Chongqing to Europe. It's 13 days, but in the past, they go to Europe through the maritime route. It took 30 days, and it saved a lot of time. And Chongqing is also the gateway, the ambitious plan and project is that it makes 2 hours to Indian Ocean through the port Chongqing helped build in Burma, and also to Xinjiang Railway to Central Asia. But all this makes Chongqing not a close province or city, but actually a closer city to the rest of the world. The significance of Chongqing's story is in the term coined by Ted Koppel that Chongqing is a People's Republic of capitalism. But from my study of Chongqing story, I prefer to call it the People's Republic of socialism. For over 60 years, Chinese society has been divided by the dichotomy system of holding either rural or urban residential cards. Last year, Chongqing decided to allow all its rural residents to have urban residential cards and enjoy all the social welfares like city people. And by giving the residential card to rural people, the Chongqing government provide free basic medical care and pensions to all its citizens, whether they live in urban or rural area. 50% of Chongqing government budget go to people's life-oriented project, while China as a whole spend only 30% of the nation's budget on people's life. That make a big difference. And Chongqing also have this goal, which is called 5 Chongqing. 5 Chongqing include a Chongqing covered by forest, a Chongqing with smooth traffic, a Chongqing with safety for its citizens, a Chongqing with free and better medical care, a Chongqing where its residents and visitors living comfortably and happily. And last year, Chongqing has built public housing for 500,000 low-income families whose monthly income are below $300. building public renting housing for the low middle class, many of whom are migrant workers and university students, graduates, who found it hard to find a decent housing. By providing loans to 2 million small and middle-sized private enterprises, Chongqing has created 3.3 million new jobs for its people. And another important widely reported in China that it's rural education reform. There are today in Chongqing over 2 million adolescents out of a total 4 million who belong to families with one or both parents working in urban areas. A project for supporting the so-called left-behind children, that is, children of former farmer family whose parents are both working in the urban area and are therefore leaving their children on their own in the countryside, with the problem including the development of a social behavior and the risk of social unrest. Chongqing built 400 new boarding schools in the countryside, supporting almost 500,000 students attending boarding schools in the countryside, and the exemption from tuition and housing costs for 57,000 left-behind children studying at vocational middle schools. And the most sensitive thing about the farmers' land. Under the Chinese Constitution, the farmers are not entitled to own their own land. But in Chongqing, the government established the first land exchange certificate in which peasants who have converted their land into arable land can get a land certificate that can be sold in auctions organized by the land exchange. This is the way for the peasants to share some of the land value increase of urbanization, because people living far from the city can get their share and get payment as long as they can convert rural land back to arable land or back to farmland. But now only, for instance, in Beijing, only farmers living on the outskirts of city benefit from the expansion of the urbanization. And the people living in distant mountains, they did not get any benefit from urbanization. But the Chongqing policy benefit all the people, even living in the mountains. So my question is Chongqing a model for China? Chongqing today is a source of inspiration to most Chinese people, particularly to the poor people. Chongqing tried to spread the development gains more equally among the people. But is Chongqing the dreamland of China? Can China use Chongqing's success as a new model for development? Before answering the question, we need to see China today, to see China yesterday, and to see China tomorrow. Since 1949, the Chinese Communist Party gains its legitimacy through stating the development goal of making people wealthy and the nation strong. Mao Zedong set the goal of for modernization by high accumulation, low consumption, by giving priority to heavy industry, including defense industry. And the policy resulted in increasing disparity between urban and rural area. So Mao's legacy includes material capital, infrastructure, independent industrial system, the national economic system, improved health service and education system, improved international status. But Mao excluded market and excluded private sector. So people live in the poverty. Many people live under poverty line. Deng Xiaoping introduced market mechanism. He broke up state monopoly. He allowed private sector of the economy. He allowed direct grassroots elections. And since 1978, Chinese people have experienced a change in which everyone becomes better off. The Chinese are most optimistic in the world about their future. But the Deng legacy is mixed, and he emphasized top priority on speed of development. He advocates an imbalanced development. He allows some regions, some people to get rich first. He concentrates on the development of coast regions. As a result, an unjust distribution of income and polarization. and greater regional disparity, a larger gap among different regions. From Mao to Deng, China went through a transition from a monetary planned economy to socialist market economy, from a traditional rural society to a modern metropolitan society, from an extremely low income level to a middle income level, from dire poverty to a generally comfortable standard of living, from autarchical economy and society to a wide open economy and society. But now China is facing a big problem. The Chinese Communist Party is losing its grip on Chinese society as a result of market economy and urbanization. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening. The richest 10% hold 45% of the wealth, and the poorest 10% have only 1.4%. The per capita income of urban resident is 3.33 times that of rural dwellers. People in the coastal area make twice as much as residents living in the western provinces. And the Gini coefficient in China was around 28 in 1978 and is now approaching 55, one of the highest in the world. Gini coefficient is commonly used as a measure of inequality of wealth. Worldwide, the Gini coefficient for income ranges from approximately 23 in Sweden to 70 in Namibia. And if we look at the figure, the data here, the China in 2009, China's Gini index is 45.5, but now the last year it's growing, and this year it is approaching 55. So income equality between urban and rural area between 1984 and 2003, the gap had widened from a ratio of 1.85 to 3.23. Between 2003 and 2009, it went up only from 3.23 to 3.33. And between 2007 and 2009, it stayed practically stable at 3.33. And as a result, the Chinese people, many Chinese people, are getting angrier. Because wealth concentration has been getting out of control. The fruits of the country's growth and the fruits of the Chinese reform and opening to the outside world are concentrated in 1% of the population, who are the ruling elites in banks, in media industry, in business, and in the upper echelon of the government. Political and ideological extremism, both the far left and the far right, such as hatred of the rich and hatred of civil servants, are becoming social movement in the country. On the eve of the 17th Congress of the Communist Party of China in 2007, Susan Shirk published a book, China, Fragile Superpower. And I quote her here. The more developed and prosperous the country becomes, the more insecure and threatened they feel. And now the 18th Party Congress will be held next year. And now elections are taking place for the delegates of the Party Congress from this month. The problem facing the party and the Party Congress is how well is the party equipped in terms of ideological, economic, social, political instrument for further improving the life of the Chinese people. The internal problem China is facing include a transition from a middle-income country to a high-income society. But China society is suffering from poverty to a society plagued by social injustice, corruption, unemployment, and particularly they enlarge the gap between poor and rich, between city and village, between coastal provinces and western regions. And the Chongqing story, what's the significance of the Chongqing story and what's the meaning of Chongqing story to solve this problem the Chinese Communist Party is facing? Does Chongqing story indicate the emergence of a new development strategy? Chongqing government has announced that it will make Gini coefficient go down from 42 to 35, and the ratio between urban and the rural area from the nationwide 3.33 to 2.5. It is expected that 18th Party Congress will emphasize, as Hu Jintao said, people first. That means serve the people. Scientific development, a fair and just distribution of the society. And now it's been speculated and reported that the agenda of the 18th Party Congress include electing Chinese new leadership. And people are now discussing and speculating who will be the members of the Politburo, particularly who will be the member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, member of the Communist Party Central Committee. And the Congress will reach a consensus in analyzing the situation in the party, in China, and in the world. The Congress will propose a theory, a new theory and a new strategic thinking for the ruling party in the next 5 years, And the Congress will develop a guide of action for the next 5 years. And when Jiang Zemin had its Congress, he proposed the 3 representatives. And when Hu Jintao had his Congress, he proposed the scientific, the people first and scientific development. And so now people are speculating what Xi Jinping will propose as his strategy. But anyway, Chongqing experience and the Chongqing story gave a fresh angle, debating the agenda and the strategy at the coming 18th Party Congress. And the people are discussing and debating in the Chongqing story, a message of hope. Thank you. Any question?